It was supposed to be the happiest moment of her life. The music played, the guests cheered, and the knife was inches away from the frosting. But suddenly, a dirty, limping, stray dog burst into the tent, moving like a missile. He didn't run to the guests. He launched himself straight at the massive wedding cake, destroying it in seconds. The groom shouted, security moved in, and the bride covered her mouth in horror. Everyone thought the dog was mad. But moments later, when the security team looked down at the ruined dessert, the room fell deathly silent. Because the dog hadn't just ruined a wedding, he had stopped a disaster. What was hidden inside the cake, and why was this stray the only one who knew? The sun rose over Napa Valley, painting the endless rows of vineyards in soft shades of gold and amber. It was a picture-perfect morning. The air smelled of blooming jasmine and expensive champagne. At the prestigious Silvervine estate, staff moved with military precision. Waiters polished crystal glasses until they sparkled. Florists arranged thousands of white roses into towering arches. Everything had to be flawless. Michael, the groom, stood on the terrace overlooking the valley, adjusting his cufflinks. He was a successful architect, a man who built his life on order, symmetry, and perfection. "The cake delivery is 10 minutes late," he muttered into his phone, his brow furrowing. "I paid $50,000 for that masterpiece. If it has a single crack in the icing, I'm suing." He was stressed. He wanted this day to be the fairy tale his bride, Sarah, had always dreamed of. But Sarah wasn't thinking about the cake, or the flowers, or the 300 guests arriving in limousines. Inside the bridal suite, she felt suffocated. "I just need some air," she whispered to her bridesmaids, who were busy steaming her veil. Before they could protest, Sarah slipped out the back door, gathering the heavy silk of her gown in her hands. She found herself in the service alley behind the main kitchen. Here, the air was cooler, quieter. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. That's when she heard it, a soft, rhythmic scratching sound coming from behind the large metal dumpsters. Sarah froze. "Hello?" she called out softly. A shadow moved. Slowly, cautiously, a head poked out from behind a pile of discarded cardboard boxes. It was a dog, but not the kind of dog that belonged in a place like this. He was a German Shepherd mix, thin and neglected. He held his left front paw off the ground, shivering slightly. He looked at Sarah with wide, intelligent amber eyes, eyes that held no aggression, only a weary, desperate hope. Sarah's heart broke instantly. She had always loved animals, often more than people. "Oh, you poor thing," she cooed, crouching down in her expensive dress, ignoring the dust on the pavement. "Are you hungry?" The dog didn't move closer. He didn't trust easily. Sarah looked around. On a nearby tray left by a waiter, there was a plate of gourmet sausages meant for the staff breakfast. She grabbed 2 of them and tossed them gently toward the dog. "It's okay," she whispered. "I won't hurt you." The dog sniffed the air. Then, realizing the offer was genuine, he limped forward and ate the food. He looked up at Sarah and gave a small, hesitant wag of his tail. For a moment, the stress of the wedding vanished. It was just the girl and the stray sharing a quiet secret in the alleyway. "I wish I could take you inside," Sarah said, smiling sadly, "but Michael would be upset if he saw you." She didn't know it yet, but that small act of kindness had just saved her life. Suddenly, the rumble of a heavy engine shattered the peace. A large white van with tinted windows pulled into the service driveway. The logo on the side read, "Elite Confectionery." The cake had arrived. The dog's demeanor changed instantly. His ears flattened against his skull. The small wag of his tail stopped dead. He backed away into the shadows, his body tense. 2 men jumped out of the van. One was tall and broad, the other shorter, wearing a cap pulled low over his eyes. They moved to the back of the van and opened the doors, revealing a massive multi-tiered structure covered in white fondant and silver leaf. "Careful with it," the shorter man snapped. His voice was rough, tight with tension. "This thing is heavy." Sarah stood up, brushing her dress. "Oh, good, the cake is here." She smiled at the delivery men, but they didn't smile back. The man in the cap avoided her gaze entirely, keeping his head down as he pushed the heavy trolley toward the kitchen entrance. But the dog saw what Sarah didn't. From his hiding spot, the stray's nostrils flared. He inhaled deeply, tracking the scent trailing behind the van and the men. It wasn't just the smell of sugar and vanilla. Underneath the sweetness, there was something else, something sharp, chemical. It was a scent the dog remembered from the streets, the smell of danger, the smell of things that shouldn't be eaten. A low growl rumbled in his chest. He stepped out from behind the dumpster. "Hey!" the tall delivery man shouted, waving his hand. "Go away!" The head of security, a burly man named Frank, rounded the corner. "What's going on here?" Frank asked. "This stray is bothering us," the delivery man sneered. "Get it away from the food." Frank sighed. "I'll handle it. Go inside." Sarah stepped forward. "Don't hurt him. He's harmless." "He's a health code violation, ma'am," Frank said sternly. "Go back to the party. I'll chase him off." He stomped his foot on the ground. "Go! Get out of here!" The dog flinched. He looked at Sarah one last time, his amber eyes filled with an urgent, silent warning she couldn't understand. Then, he turned and ran toward the vineyard fence. "Finally," Frank muttered. Sarah felt a pang of guilt as she watched the dog disappear into the vines. She turned and followed the cake into the kitchen. But outside, the dog hadn't left. He crouched low in the tall grass, watching the building. His instincts were screaming. The bad smell was inside now. The nice lady was inside. He whined softly. He knew he should run. He knew humans were dangerous. But as he watched the silhouette of the waiter moving through the window, the dog made a choice. He wasn't leaving. The storm was gathering over the Silvervine estate, and only he could see it coming. The wedding ceremony began like a scene from a Hollywood movie. A string quartet played a soft melody as the guests took their seats on white wooden chairs arranged on the lawn. The sun was high now, bathing the vineyard in a warm, golden glow. Michael stood at the altar, looking every bit the perfect groom. His tuxedo was tailored to the millimeter, his smile practiced and confident. To him, this wasn't just a wedding. It was a statement, a declaration of his success. He scanned the crowd, nodding to business partners and distant relatives. Everything was going exactly to plan. The security team was patrolling the perimeter, invisible but present. The flowers were blooming on cue. And then the music changed. The heavy oak doors of the main house opened, and Sarah stepped out. She looked breathtaking. Her lace dress flowed around her like water, catching the light with every step. The guests gasped. Phones were raised to capture the moment. Sarah smiled, clutching her bouquet of white roses. Her eyes locked onto Michael, and for a second, the world fell away. She had forgotten about the stray in the alley. She had forgotten the strange tension with the delivery men. She was just a woman in love, walking toward her future. But 50 yards away, hidden deep within the rows of grapevines, a pair of amber eyes watched her every move. The dog lay flat on his belly in the dirt. He wasn't watching the bride because she was beautiful. He was watching her because she was the only one who had shown him kindness. And he knew she was walking into a trap. The dog's nose twitched, filtering through the scents of expensive perfume and cut grass. He found it again, that sharp chemical sting. It was fainter now, masked by the open air, but it was there, and it was moving. The dog shifted his gaze from the altar to the side of the tent. There, standing near the entrance of the reception marquee, was the short man from the van. He wasn't wearing his delivery clothes anymore. He was dressed in a crisp white waiter's uniform, a silver tray tucked under his arm. To the human eye, he looked like just another member of the catering staff. He blended in perfectly. But the dog saw the truth. He saw the way the man's eyes darted left and right, never resting on anything for long. He saw the sweat beading on the man's upper lip, even though the breeze was cool. And most importantly, he saw the way the man kept touching his pocket, tapping it nervously, as if checking that something was still there. The waiter wasn't watching the ceremony. He was staring at the massive cake, now positioned like a crown jewel in the center of the reception tent. He looked at it with a mix of hatred and satisfaction. The dog let out a low whine. His instincts were screaming at him, run, hide, survive. That was the code of the streets. Don't get involved. Don't draw attention. Stay invisible. If he went out there, the men might catch him. He looked at the fence behind him. It was open. He could slip away into the hills and never look back. But then Sarah laughed. The sound carried across the lawn, light and happy. The dog's ears perked up. He remembered the taste of the sausage she gave him. He remembered her soft voice saying, "I won't hurt you." In a world of fear, she had given him a moment of peace. The ceremony ended. The crowd erupted in applause. Michael kissed Sarah, and the guests began to drift toward the reception tent, toward the champagne, toward the speeches, toward the cake. The waiter moved too. He walked briskly toward the cake trolley, adjusting the silver knife that lay on the table beside it. The dog's muscles coiled. He stood up, shaking off the dust of the vineyard. The fur along his spine stood rigid. He wasn't a pet. He wasn't a hero. He was just a stray who knew the difference between a bad smell and a bad man. And he knew that once those people started eating, it would be too late. He took a step forward, emerging from the vines. Then another. He picked up speed. He didn't bark yet. He needed the element of surprise. As Michael led Sarah toward the tent, raising a glass to toast his friends, he had no idea that a four-legged guardian was closing in on his perfect day. The silence of the vineyard was about to be shattered. The reception tent was a cathedral of white silk and crystal chandeliers. Inside, the air was thick with laughter and the clinking of expensive champagne flutes. 200 guests sat at round tables covered in linen so white it hurt the eyes. Waiters moved like ghosts, refilling glasses before they were even half empty. At the head table, Michael stood up, tapping a silver spoon against his glass. The room fell silent. "To perfection," he said, raising his glass, his smile dazzling. "And to my beautiful wife, who finally agreed to marry me." The crowd chuckled politely. Sarah smiled, but her fingers nervously traced the rim of her glass. She couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It sat in her stomach like a cold stone. "And now," Michael announced, gesturing to the back of the room, "the centerpiece of the evening." The band struck up a fanfare. The double doors swung open. A collective gasp of admiration rippled through the room. The cake was magnificent. 5 tiers of ivory fondant, cascading sugar flowers, and delicate silver piping. It stood over 6 feet tall on a rolling cart. Pushing it was the short man in the waiter's uniform. He kept his head bowed, his hands gripping the handle of the cart tightly. Too tightly. As he wheeled it into the center of the dance floor, he didn't look at the bride or groom. He looked at the floor, counting the steps. Outside the tent, the real struggle had begun. The stray dog reached the main entrance panting hard. He could smell it stronger now. The chemical bitter scent was overpowering, wafting out from the tent. He tried to trot through the open flap. "Hey, you again!" Frank, the head of security, stepped in front of him. "I told you to beat it," Frank growled. He blocked the path. "Get out of here," Frank hissed, stepping forward to block the entrance completely. The dog retreated, his ears flat. To Frank, the dog was just a pest. But the dog wasn't retreating. He was strategizing. He circled the perimeter of the massive tent, his nose brushing against the canvas. He found a loose spot near the catering station, a gap where the stake had pulled up slightly from the soft ground. He dug his claws into the earth, flattening his body like a snake. He pushed his head under the heavy fabric, then his shoulders, then his hips. He dragged himself through the dirt, determined to get inside. Inside the tent, the applause for the cake was dying down. "Shall we?" Michael asked, offering his hand to Sarah. She took it. They walked toward the center of the room, the spotlight following them. The waiter stepped back, fading into the crowd of staff, his eyes dark and watchful. Michael picked up the silver cake knife. It gleamed under the chandeliers. "Ready?" he whispered to Sarah. "Ready," she lied. She reached out to place her hand over his on the handle. At that exact moment, a low, menacing bark echoed from the corner of the room. Heads turned, the music faltered. From beneath the tablecloth of the gift table, a shape emerged, dirty, desperate. The stray dog stood up, shaking the dust from his coat. A woman in the front row gasped. "What is that thing doing here?" a guest shouted. "Security!" Michael yelled, his face turning red. "Get this animal out, now!" Frank and 2 other guards burst into the tent, scanning the room. The dog didn't look at them. He stood alone in the aisle, his body trembling with adrenaline. He looked at the guests, confused and frightened. He looked at the guards, reaching for them. And then he looked at Sarah. Their eyes met across the room. Sarah froze. She saw the urgency in his posture, but mostly she saw the way he was looking at the cake. He wasn't looking at it like food. He was looking at it like an enemy. The dog let out a sharp, piercing bark. He took a step forward, not at the bride, not at the groom, but at the tower of sugar that was about to harm them. "Don't let him get near Sarah," Michael shouted, stepping in front of her. The guards charged. The waiter near the wall reached into his pocket, his face pale. The dog knew he had no time left, no time to explain, no time to beg. He dug his claws into the expensive carpet. He coiled his muscles. He had one shot, and he was going to take it. It happened in the blink of an eye. 1 second, the room was frozen in shock. The next, it was a blur of motion. The stray dog pushed off the carpet. He moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible. "Grab him," Frank shouted, lunging forward. But the dog was faster. He ducked under the security guard's outstretched arm, his body low to the ground. A waiter tried to block him with a tray of champagne. The dog didn't stop. He skidded, scrambled, and kept going. Glasses crashed to the floor. Women screamed. Chairs toppled over. Michael stood by the cake, the silver knife raised. He looked at the approaching animal with pure fury. "Get away," he yelled, but the dog couldn't stop. He could smell the chemical scent rising off the cake like toxic steam. It was right there, right in front of the nice lady's face. He had to separate them. He didn't aim for Sarah. He didn't aim for Michael. He aimed for the cart, 10 feet away, 5 feet. The dog planted his back legs and launched himself into the air. For a heartbeat, he seemed to hang there, a dirty missile suspended against the white silk of the tent ceiling. Then, impact. He hit the side of the cake trolley with every ounce of weight he had. Crash! The sound was deafening. The $50,000 masterpiece didn't just fall, it exploded. 5 tiers of fondant, sponge, and silver leaf collapsed in a white avalanche. The metal trolley tipped over, sending the massive dessert crashing onto the dance floor. Cream flew everywhere, splattering onto tuxedos and evening gowns. The top tier rolled away, stopping at the feet of the mother of the bride. The dog landed hard in the middle of the mess. He slipped on the frosting, his legs scrambling for traction, but he didn't run. He stood over the ruins of the cake, his chest heaving. He barked furiously at the pile of sugar, snapping his jaws at the white mound as if it were a living beast. "Get back," he seemed to be saying. "Don't touch it." But to the humans, it looked like madness. "My cake!" Michael roared, his face purple with rage. "He ruined the cake!" Sarah stood frozen, her dress splattered with icing. She was shaking, her hands pressed to her mouth. The dog turned toward her, whining urgently. He nudged a piece of the cake away with his nose, then looked up at her, pleading. But the moment for understanding had passed. "That's it," Frank snarled. The head of security stepped through the crowd. "Move aside, Mr. Groom," Frank said coldly. "I'm removing this animal." The dog froze. He lowered his head, ears flat. He didn't growl. He just looked at Sarah. He had tried to save her. No, the scream tore through the silence. Sarah didn't think. She didn't care about her dress. She didn't care about the guests. She threw herself forward, sliding on her knees into the pile of ruined cake. She wrapped her arms around the dirty, shivering dog, shielding his body with her own. "Don't you dare!" she screamed, looking up at Frank with wild, fierce eyes. "Don't touch him!" "Sarah, move!" Michael shouted, stepping forward. "It's dangerous. It attacked us." "He didn't attack us," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "He attacked the cake." "He's mad, Sarah. Look at him." Michael pointed at the dog, who was now sniffing the frosting on Sarah's arm, whining softly. "He's not mad," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. She looked down at the mess on the floor, at the place where the dog had dug his paws in. The lights from the chandelier reflected off something in the ruined bottom tier, something that shouldn't have been in a cake. It glittered, sharp, jagged. Sarah frowned. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the sticky fondant. "Michael," she said, her voice dropping to a horrified whisper. "What? What is it?" he asked, still glaring at the dog. Sarah pulled her hand back, and stuck in the white cream, glistening under the spotlight, was a shard of clear glass. And next to it, another, and another. Thousands of them. Sarah gasped, the air leaving her lungs. "Wait," she said, her voice shaking with a realization that turned her blood to ice. "What?" Frank asked. "Look," Sarah screamed, holding up a handful of the ruined cake. The light caught the shards, making the dessert sparkle with a deadly hidden frost. "Look," she sobbed, pointing at the glass hidden in the sponge. "He didn't ruin the wedding," He just saved our lives." The silence that followed Sarah's scream was heavier than the crash of the cake. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated horror. Michael stood frozen, the silver knife slipping from his sweaty grip and clattering onto the dance floor. Sarah remained on her knees, surrounded by the wreckage of the dessert. She held her hand out, trembling violently. Embedded in the creamy white frosting were jagged, glittering shards, not one, not two, thousands. The bottom tier of the cake wasn't just baked with flour and sugar. It had been laced with crushed glass. A guest in the front row leaned forward, squinting. Then she gasped, covering her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered, "it's everywhere." The realization hit the room like a physical blow. If the dog hadn't jumped, if Michael had cut that slice, if the guests had taken a bite, the wedding reception would have turned into a tragedy. "Don't touch it," Michael's voice cracked, losing all its arrogant polish. "Nobody touch anything." He looked down at the mess, his face draining of color. He saw a faint powdery residue mixed with the glass, bluish, chemical. It wasn't just glass, it was poison, a lethal cocktail disguised as a celebration. Sarah looked down at the dog in her arms. He had stopped struggling. He lay heavy against her chest, panting hard. "He knew," she whispered, her tears dripping onto his fur. When he had bitten into the cake, when he had attacked the fondant to warn them, he had exposed himself to the danger. He had taken the first bite so they wouldn't have to. "He needs a vet," Sarah cried, looking up at Michael. "Now!" Michael stared at the animal he had wanted to kick out just moments ago. The dog looked back at him. He gave a soft, weary thump of his tail. Shame washed over Michael. "Frank," Michael said, his voice low and serious. "Sir?" "Get the car. This dog needs help. Now." "Yes, sir." But as the shock began to fade, a new feeling took over the room. Fear. This wasn't an accident. Cakes don't explode with glass and poison by mistake. Someone had done this. Someone had planned this, and whoever it was likely still in the tent. Frank grabbed his radio. "Code red. Seal the exits. Nobody leaves this property. I repeat, nobody leaves." Security guards moved instantly, blocking the main doors and the side flaps. Guests began to panic. Whispers turned into shouts. "Quiet!" Frank roared. "Stay where you are!" In the chaos, Sarah felt the dog tense up in her arms. He lifted his head. His ears swiveled toward the back of the tent near the catering entrance. He let out a low growl. Sarah followed his gaze. The crowd was a sea of confused faces, waiters, guests, musicians, but one person wasn't looking at the cake. One person was moving, the waiter who had pushed the cart, the short man with the cap. He was backing away slowly, his eyes darting toward the kitchen service door, the only exit not yet blocked by a guard. He had seen the glass. He had seen the dog survive. And he knew his time was up. The dog tried to stand, his claws slipping in the frosting. "No, stay still," Sarah begged. "You're hurt." But the dog wouldn't listen. The job wasn't finished. The bad man was getting away. With a burst of strength that came from pure instinct, the stray pulled away from Sarah's grip. He didn't run this time. He stumbled. He moved with a purpose that cut through the panic of the crowd. He barked once, a sharp, accusing sound, and pointed his muzzle straight at the retreating figure. "There!" a bridesmaid shouted, pointing. "He's running!" The waiter saw he was spotted. He abandoned stealth. He shoved a tray of glasses into a passing guest and bolted for the door. "Stop him!" Michael yelled. But the man was fast. He hit the kitchen doors with his shoulder, bursting out into the night. The dog didn't hesitate. Exhaustion, pain, none of it mattered. He scrambled over the ruined cake and took off after the killer. The hunt was on. The double doors of the kitchen swung shut. Outside, the air was cool and sharp. The waiter was fast. Panic had given him a burst of adrenaline. He sprinted across the gravel service road. He wasn't looking back. He was looking at his getaway vehicle, a rusted gray sedan parked behind the delivery vans. 50 yards behind him, the stray dog hit the pavement. He stumbled, his leg weak under his weight. A whimper escaped his throat, but he swallowed it down. He could see the man. "Don't let him go." The command wasn't spoken, but it echoed in the dog's ancient instincts. If the bad man left, he would come back. The dog forced himself up. He began to run. Inside the reception tent, the chaos had turned into a mob. "He went out the back!" Sarah screamed. Michael didn't wait for security. He tore off his tuxedo jacket and ran. "Frank, with me!" he yelled. The groom and the head of security burst out of the tent. They saw the scene unfolding in front of them. The criminal had reached the car. He was fumbling with his keys, his hands shaking. He jammed the key into the lock and threw the door open, but he wasn't fast enough. A low snarl rose from the darkness. The man looked down. The stray dog was there. He was tired, he was weak, but he was fierce. The man kicked out, trying to scare him off. "Get away!" the man screamed, jumping into the driver's seat and slamming the door. The engine roared to life. The tires spun, kicking up a cloud of smoke and gravel. The car lurched forward. Michael was still 20 yards away. "Stop!" he shouted. "Stop the car!" But the sedan was picking up speed. It was going to escape. The dog knew he couldn't outrun a machine, but he had to try. As the car accelerated, the dog ran alongside it, barking furiously at the driver's window. The driver, panicked and looking down at the barking animal, jerked the steering wheel hard to the left to avoid hitting him. "Get away!" the man shouted. The sudden swerve at high speed was too much. The car spun out of control, missing the exit gate. It slammed into a stack of heavy oak wine barrels. Crash! Wood splintered. Red wine exploded everywhere. The sedan's front bumper crumpled and the engine died with a hiss of steam. The dog skidded to a halt, safe but exhausted, collapsing into the dirt. "Got him!" Frank roared. The security team swarmed the wrecked car. Frank didn't hesitate. He pulled the driver out. "Hands! Let me see your hands!" Frank yelled. The man flailed, screaming, "It wasn't me! I was just following orders!" Frank cuffed his hands behind his back. But Michael didn't look at the criminal. He ran past the wreckage to the small shape lying in the spilled wine. "Hey," Michael whispered, dropping to his knees. "Hey, buddy." The dog lay on his side. His coat was soaked with wine. His chest rose and fell in shallow gasps. Michael reached out, his hand trembling. He touched the dog's head gently. The stray opened one eye. It was glazed, unfocused. But when he saw Michael, he gave a weak, almost invisible wag of his tail. "Did I do good?" the gesture seemed to ask. "Yeah," Michael choked out, tears blurring his vision. "Yeah, you did good. You did so good." Sirens wailed in the distance. The police were coming. Frank marched the handcuffed man over to where Michael knelt. "Boss," Frank said, "you need to see this." Michael stood up. He looked at the man Frank was holding. The cap had fallen off. Under the harsh light, the man's face was visible. He wasn't young. His face was lined with bitterness. Michael frowned. He knew that face. "Wait," Michael whispered. "I know you." The man glared at Michael. "Of course you know me," the man sneered. "You destroyed my life." It wasn't a waiter. It was Daniel, the former owner of the bakery that stood where Michael's newest skyscraper was now being built. "You took my legacy," Daniel hissed, "so I took your celebration." Michael stared at him, shock washing over him. This wasn't just a crime. It was revenge. And the only thing standing between a bitter man and a disaster was the brave dog at their feet. "Get him out of my sight," Michael said quietly. Then he turned back to Frank. "Where is the ambulance?" "It's 10 minutes out, sir." "We don't have 10 minutes, Michael said, scooping the limp dog into his arms. "Bring my car around. I'm driving him myself." The flashing lights of the arriving police cruisers cut through the darkness. But in the center of the chaos, time seemed to stand still. Michael stood over the handcuffed man. "Why?" Michael asked. "Why would you do this?" Daniel lifted his head. "My bakery," Daniel spat. "The Golden Crumb. My grandfather built it. You forced me into bankruptcy so you could build a parking garage." He looked over at the ruined wedding tent. "I lost my home. So I thought, why should you have a sweet beginning when you gave me a bitter end?" Michael felt sick. "You put glass in a cake," Michael said, his voice trembling. "You tried to hurt innocent people because of a building?" "I wanted you to suffer," Daniel screamed. "You're sick," Frank growled, shoving him toward the officers. As they dragged Daniel away, he kept laughing, a broken, manic sound. But Michael wasn't listening anymore. "Michael, help me!" It was Sarah. She had reached the crash site. She was on her knees beside the dog. Michael turned and ran to her. The scene was heartbreaking. The dog was lying in a puddle of spilled red wine. His breathing was shallow. "He's not moving," Sarah sobbed. Michael dropped beside her. "He exhausted himself," Michael whispered. "He gave everything he had." The dog's eyes were half closed. He let out a soft whine. "No," Sarah said, shaking her head. No, you don't get to quit. Do you hear me? You saved us. A paramedic jogged over. Let me see, he said. He checked the dog quickly. I can't treat this here, the medic said. He's in shock. He needs a vet immediately. Where's the nearest one? Michael asked. Downtown Napa, 20 minutes. Michael stood up. He looked at his luxury car parked near the entrance. Frank! Michael shouted. Open the door! Michael bent down and scooped the dog up. The animal was heavy. Sarah scrambled up. I'm coming with you. Get in, Michael commanded. He placed the dog gently on the back seat. Sarah climbed in beside him, resting the dog's head on her lap. Stay with us, boy, she whispered. Michael jumped into the driver's seat. He revved the engine. Clear the road, he yelled at the officers. Michael slammed his foot on the gas. The car shot forward, leaving the ruined wedding and the bitter past behind. They were racing against time. And for the first time in his life, Michael wasn't driving for money or success. He was driving for a stray who had taught him what loyalty really meant. The white convertible screeched to a halt in front of the Napa Valley Emergency Vet Clinic. Michael didn't bother to park. He kicked the door open and scooped the dog into his arms. Sarah was right behind him. They burst through the sliding glass doors. Help! Michael shouted. We need a vet, now! The receptionist looked up, startled. What happened? She asked. He saved us, Michael gasped. He needs help. The doors swung open. A team of vet techs rushed out. Get him on the table, a doctor shouted. They lifted the dog from Michael's arms. He's crashing, one of the techs said, checking the pulse. Get the oxygen. No, Sarah cried. Don't let him go. Ma'am, please stay back, the nurse said gently. The gurney disappeared behind the swinging doors. The red light above the frame flickered on. Surgery in progress. The silence in the waiting room was suffocating. Sarah sat on a hard plastic chair, shivering. Her dress was ruined, but she didn't care. Michael paced the room. He washed his hands in the small sink, trying to wash away the guilt. He sat down next to Sarah. I wanted to kick him out, Michael whispered. In the alley, I called him a pest. He shook his head. If I had succeeded, we would be in the hospital right now. Sarah took his hand. He didn't leave, she said softly. Why? Michael asked. Because I gave him a sandwich, Sarah whispered. That's all it took. She wiped a tear. He saved us because for the first time someone was kind to him. Michael stared at the floor. A stray dog had outsmarted a killer, all for the price of a sausage. He has to make it, Michael said. I'll do whatever it takes. Minutes turned into hours. The clock ticked. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Finally, the double doors swung open. The vet, Dr. Evans, stepped out. He looked tired. Sarah stood up instantly. Doctor? She asked. Dr. Evans took a deep breath. It was close, the doctor said. Is he alive? Michael demanded. He is, Dr. Evans said. Sarah let out a sob of relief. But, the doctor continued, he's very weak. We removed the glass he swallowed. He's exhausted and has some internal bruising from the impact of the chase, but his heart is strong, Sarah gasped. Will he make it? The next 24 hours are decisive, Dr. Evans said. But he's a fighter. I've never seen a dog hold on like that. Can we see him? Sarah begged. The doctor nodded. Briefly, he's resting. They followed the doctor down the hallway. At the end of the hall, in a quiet room, lay the hero of the wedding. He looked so small on the blankets. An IV drip was connected to his leg. He was asleep. Sarah walked to the cage and placed her hand on the glass. Hey, buddy, she whispered. The dog didn't move, but his ear twitched. Michael stood behind her. He needs a name, Michael said softly. Sarah looked back at him. We can't just call him Stray anymore. Sarah looked at the dog, breathing steadily now. Lucky, she whispered. Michael nodded. Lucky, he repeated, because we were the lucky ones. The sun rose over Napa Valley. At 8 a.m., the dog opened his eyes. When he saw Michael and Sarah sitting by his cage, something magical happened. Thump. His tail hit the blanket. Thump, thump. It was slow, but it was unmistakable. He remembered them. Oh, baby, Sarah cried, smiling through tears. You scared us. The dog let out a soft sigh and rested his head on his paws. Michael walked into the room. He dropped to his knees. I'm sorry, Michael whispered. I'm so sorry. The dog blinked slowly. Then he leaned forward and nudged Michael's hand. It was a seal of forgiveness. You're not a stray anymore, Michael promised. You're never sleeping outside again. You're coming home. It was a Tuesday evening in the hills of Napa, 2 months after the wedding. The sun was setting over Michael's mansion. Inside, lying on the expensive rug, was a happy, healthy dog. Michael walked into the room. "Lucky!" he called out. "Dinner time!" Lucky trotted into the room. His coat shone like copper. He wagged his tail, looking up at Michael with adoring eyes. "Come on, buddy," Michael whispered. Sarah was already seated, watching the news. "Look," she said, "the story is everywhere." On the screen, a news anchor was speaking about the Guardian of Napa. "The suspect, Daniel V., is currently awaiting trial," the reporter said. The video showed a photo of Lucky leaving the clinic, looking proud. "Everyone wants an interview," Sarah said. "Tell them no," Michael said firmly. "He's retired." Lucky rested his chin on Michael's knee. Michael slipped a piece of steak under the table. Lucky took it gently. Later that night, Michael stood on the balcony. Lucky was there, leaning against his leg. Michael crouched down. "You changed everything," Michael whispered. Lucky licked his cheek. In the distance, a siren wailed, but inside this house there was peace. Because sometimes angels don't come down from heaven with wings. Sometimes they come from the alleyways, waiting for us to be kind enough to let them save us. Michael stood up. "Come on, Lucky," he said. "Let's go to bed." The dog trotted inside, finally home. And that is the story of Lucky, the stray who stopped a tragedy and found a family. It reminds us that heroes can be found in the most unlikely places and that a single act of kindness can change your destiny forever. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and share it with your friends. And I'm curious, what's the smartest thing your pet has ever done? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story. See.